first time I watched Apocalypse Now, I could barely breathe. I was pinned to my seat, my heart pounding. My throat clenched as if something had its hands around it. Helicopters tore through the sky. Bombs slammed into the ground. People scattered like shadows. And then Wagner crashed in, grand solemn cold to the point of inhuman. At the time, I thought I was watching a great war film. And then, only after I began digging into the behind-the-scenes stories did I realise, shaken, that Apocalypse Now was never a controlled film. It was made in chaos storms, illness debt, and real mental breakdowns. A director who threatened suicide and mortgaged everything he owned. A lead actor who suffered a heart attack in the jungle. A 14-year-old boy who lied about his age to go to war. And scenes never written in the script became iconic because no one was sane enough to call cut. What follows are 20 of the strangest, most shocking and darkest truths behind Apocalypse Now. Leave a heart before opening these revelations that will make you see the film with completely different eyes. 20. When Willard truly shattered on camera. The first time I saw Apocalypse Now. I remember sitting perfectly still during the opening scene. Willard naked in a hotel room, a face warped by alcohol, a punch to the mirror. Blood spilling. A flawless breakdown to drag the audience straight into the hell of war. Years later, I learned something that skewed that memory entirely, that scene was never in the script. Sheen was genuinely drunk. Not drunk to get into character, but drunk because real-life problems were eating him alive. The mirror he punched was real glass. His thumb was badly torn, blood flowing exactly as the audience still sees today. Things quickly spiraled out of control. Sheen sobbed, screamed, his emotions exploding in front of the camera. At one point, he lost control so completely that he lunged toward director Francis Ford Coppola. The crew panicked and wanted to stop filming immediately. Sheen refused. He wanted to keep going. Years later, Sheen admitted that he was battling alcoholism and a personal crisis at the time. For him, letting the camera roll wasn't professional recklessness, it was confrontation. If he stopped, he would run again. This truth was revealed only much later in behind-the-scenes conversations between Coppola and Sheen. And once you know it, the opening scene becomes a prophecy for the entire film. Apocalypse Now was born from real pain, real danger, and a process no one, not even the director, ever fully controlled. 19. Marlon Brando and the lines we never fully heard. Do you remember Kurtz's first appearance not through action, but through his voice? Darkness swallowing most of his face. Words delivered slowly in fragments, as if he were thinking them into existence. When the scene ends, what lingers isn't a specific line, but a heavy, nameless feeling. At the time, many believed this was an elegant script choice. The truth is, Kurtz was never fully written. When Marlon Brando took on the role, he did not rely on a fixed script. Most of Kurtz's dialogue was improvised on set. Coppola let the camera run, recorded everything, and accepted that only a tiny fraction could survive on screen. Once Brando spoke continuously for 18 minutes, a stream of consciousness about war morality and human decay. In the final cut of Apocalypse Now, only about 2 minutes remain. According to Brando, by Peter Manso screenwriter Mead Roberts, listened to the entire monologue. His assessment was unusual, parts were incoherent, but much of it was brilliant with rare philosophical depth. When he finished, Brando turned to Francis Ford Coppola and said quietly, "Francis, I've gone as far as I can. If you need more, you can find another actor." Perhaps that's why Kurtz always feels incomplete, not because he says too little, but because we're only allowed to hear what the film itself could endure. 18. A borrowed voice. When Willard was no longer just Martin Sheen. Anyone who has seen Apocalypse Now remembers Willard's voice. Low, steady, slightly exhausted, sounding like a thought trapped in a skull for too long. Almost everyone assumed it was Martin Sheen's continuous, unified, inseparable from the man on screen. But behind that familiar voice lies a very different truth. one that means Willard and the film itself no longer belongs to a single person. After filming, Wrapped Francis Ford Coppola spent nearly 3 years in the editing room. The more he cut, the clearer it became that the film needed more internal narration to keep the story from completely unravelling. The problem, Martin Sheen was unavailable to return to the studio. Waiting would have dragged post-production on indefinitely. Coppola made a strange decision. He called Joe Estevez Sheen's brother, whose voice is almost identical. Estevez quietly recorded several new voiceover passages for Willard. More ironically, when Sheen suffered a heart attack in 1976, Estevez had already served as his on-screen double for certain shots. Neither job body double nor narrator was ever credited. Years later, Coppola admitted something unsettling: he could no longer tell which scenes belonged to Sheen and which to Estevez. Over time, Willard ceased to belong to a specific individual. He became a hybrid entity assembled from multiple bodies, multiple voices, multiple states of survival. 17. The cowboy hat from random prop to icon. I still vividly remember the first time Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore appeared on screen. Not the helicopters, not the smell of napalm in the famous line, but the cowboy hat on his head. It made me pause. An American officer in the Vietnamese jungle wearing a cowboy hat as if he were standing in the Wild West. I assumed it was a carefully calculated satirical choice. The truth is, the hat was never part of the original character design. In the script and costume notes, Kilgore is never described wearing one. No symbol, no metaphor. The hat was simply Robert Duvall's personal item. He wore it during test shoots between takes out of habit. Francis Ford Coppola was the one who recognised its power. He immediately saw how the hat made Kilgore terrifyingly distinct. Coppola allowed Duvall to keep wearing it, then gradually insisted on it. An unwritten accidental detail became the character's defining image. The hat turns Kilgore into an American cowboy in modern warfare, reckless, supremely confident, and utterly out of place. He behaves as if war is his personal frontier, where power grants the right to do anything as long as it feels on brand. 16. The financial gamble. $7 million from Coppola's own pocket. There's one thing audiences rarely associate with Apocalypse Now: the fear of money. On screen, the film looks vast and untamed, as if backed by a Hollywood machine with endless fuel. Behind that facade was a very different reality. The film was bleeding cash by the day. Shooting dragged far beyond schedule storms, destroyed set scenes had to be reshot again and again. The original budget quickly spiraled out of control. When studios and investors began to pull back, Francis Ford Coppola was left with no safe options. He decided to finance the film himself, around $7 million, an enormous sum in the late 1970s. To raise it, he mortgaged his house and put his family's Napa Valley winery up as collateral. If the film failed, he wouldn't just lose professional credibility, he faced total financial ruin. Coppola directed while living in constant fear of losing everything. He later admitted that some mornings he woke up doing nothing but calculating how long he could survive. That anxiety seeped into every creative decision, pushing the production to an extreme state of tension. A true gamble: win everything or lose it all. 15. Apocalypse Now nearly became a completely different film. There is a version of Apocalypse Now audiences never saw. It wasn't epic, visually overwhelming, or shaped like a war saga. In its early stage, that version belonged to George Lucas. When John Milius finished the script, Lucas was the first director approached. He was interested, but his vision was radically different from what the film would later become. Lucas didn't want a big war movie. He imagined something small, tight, and experimental. His plan sounded almost anti-Hollywood: shoot in black and white, keep the budget low, use handheld cameras in a documentary style closer to battlefield reportage than traditional cinema. He also wanted to emphasize satire, making war feel raw and absurd at the same time. Had Lucas stayed, Apocalypse Now might have resembled a 1970s indie film, harsh, difficult, and inaccessible. A film to argue about not to be dazzled by. History, however, took a different turn. Lucas left to pursue other projects, and Francis Ford Coppola filled the gap with a diametrically opposed vision colour music scale, and obsession pushed to the absolute limit. 14. Kilgore's canteen scene came from a true story. There's a moment in Apocalypse Now many people remember but aren't sure how to read. Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, who has just ordered bombings while talking about surfing, suddenly hands his canteen to a wounded Viet Cong soldier. The gesture feels humane cold and strangely mythic, like a war story told too briefly. At first glance, it seems like a fictional detail meant to make Kilgore more complex. The truth is, the scene wasn't entirely imagined. Its origin lies in a real story from the Vietnam War. A Viet Cong fighter was so badly wounded that his intestines spilled out. With no medical aid available, people tied them back into his abdomen using an enamel cooking pot. Most astonishingly, the soldier continued fighting for days afterward. The story was documented by Philip Jones Griffiths, the renowned war photographer, whose images forced the world to confront the war's brutality head-on. Coppola carried that spirit directly into the film. Kilgore then isn't just a reckless madman. He represents a warped wartime morality, one where respect doesn't come from ideology or allegiance, but from endurance and the ability to keep surviving. 13. The Real Corpses Scandal. In the pursuit of pushing Apocalypse Now toward absolute realism, the production crossed a line even it didn't anticipate. In scenes around Kurtz's compound, the props meant to create an atmosphere of death were assumed to be mannequins or fake bodies. Then a chilling truth emerged. Some of them were real human corpses. The bodies were supplied by local sources in a setting where oversight was loose and ethical boundaries blurred by production pressure. When Philippine authorities learned of it, an investigation was immediately launched. Officials moved to verify the origin of the remains, and during that time, the film crew's passports were temporarily confiscated. Eventually, the bodies were replaced with actors and mannequins, so filming could continue. The scandal was resolved, but its aftershock remained. It underscored an uncomfortable truth in chasing truth too far. Cinema can wander into places it should never touch. 12. The Buffalo Sacrifice, a real ritual. The climax of Apocalypse Now is Willard's confrontation with Kurtz intercut with the slaughter of a water buffalo, an image that stunned many viewers. What made it controversial wasn't just the imagery, but the fact that the ritual was entirely real, not staged. The footage was inspired by an actual traditional ceremony of the local Ifugao tribe in the Philippines, a cultural ritual that existed independently of war or cinema. Francis Ford Coppola witnessed the ceremony firsthand with his wife and the crew, and decided to film it using multiple cameras. Intercutting a real ritual with Kurtz's death created a powerful effect. Death ceased to be a personal act and became a sacrificial rite. The decision, however, sparked fierce controversy. Although Apocalypse Now was an American production filming in the Philippines, was not subject to US animal cruelty laws. The American Humane Association ultimately rated the film unacceptable. 11. Typhoon Olga, the set wiped out. As if the difficulties weren't enough, nature delivered a near-fatal blow. In 1976, Typhoon Olga swept through the Philippines where Apocalypse Now was filming and wiped out nearly the entire set. Locations were flattened, equipment damaged, weeks of work erased overnight. Production was forced to shut down for more than a month. For a project already over budget and behind schedule, this could have ended the film. Instead of scaling back, Coppola made the opposite choice: rebuild everything bigger than before. The reconstruction cost time and money, but it left a clear mark on the screen. The scale of the final scenes, especially Kurtz's compound, feels massive and primal, in part born directly from this disaster. having survived a natural catastrophe. Apocalypse Now came to resemble a project forged through calamity, where every frame is the result of endurance, not planning. 10. Laurence Fishburne. A 14-year-old boy walking into the hell of war. I still clearly remember the first time I saw that young soldier on the boat drifting upriver. A face barely past childhood eyes caught between curiosity and fear, always standing slightly behind the grown men around him. When Apocalypse Now began filming in 1976, Laurence Fishburne was only 14 years old. He lied about his age, claiming to be older to secure the role. A reckless decision, yet one painfully familiar in the history of American wars. In many conflicts, countless teenagers under 18 falsified their ages to go to battle. And unintentionally, Apocalypse Now recreated the very reality it was depicting: children pushed into war before they had time to grow up. Fishburne entered the film as a boy surrounded by fake explosions, but the pressure, living conditions, and endless passage of time were completely real. The shoot and post-production stretched on for years. When Apocalypse Now was finally released in 1979, Fishburne had just turned 18. Audiences saw a young soldier on screen, but behind that image lay a strange truth: the boy had grown up alongside the film itself. 9. Marlon Brando, late overweight and without his lines. When it came time to shoot Kurtz's scenes, the production was hit with another shock. Marlon Brando arrived late, visibly overweight, and most critically, without the lines Coppola had expected him to know. Every early vision of a lean, razor-sharp officer collapsed instantly. With no way out, Coppola was forced to abandon most costume designs and completely rethink his approach. Instead of revealing Brando, he buried Kurtz in darkness, using minimal lighting to conceal the actor's appearance and turn limitation into style. Dialogue stopped being polished monologues and became fragmented improvisations resembling a stream of consciousness. That instability is precisely what gave birth to such a haunting Kurtz. The character no longer felt like a conventional villain, but like a disintegrating idea, simultaneously wise and decayed. By refusing to prepare in the traditional sense, Brando accidentally delivered one of the most unforgettable performances in cinema history. 8. 11 minutes on screen. Robert Duvall's legendary performance. Across the massive runtime of Apocalypse Now, Robert Duvall appears for only about 11 minutes as Colonel Kilgore. A shocking number considering the character's lasting impact. Yet, those 11 minutes were enough to earn Duvall an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Kilgore arrives like a brief storm. He brings iconic lines, unmistakable imagery, and a form of authority that is both absurd and terrifying. The character doesn't evolve in the traditional sense, but leaves such a deep imprint that many viewers remember Kilgore more vividly than protagonists who appear for hours. It proves one thing: cinema doesn't measure weight by screen time. Apocalypse Now shows that a character can become legendary in just a few minutes if placed correctly and charged with the right energy. 7. 5 million feet of film, the editing nightmare. When filming ended, Apocalypse Now was far from finished. What Francis Ford Coppola was left with was a number that would terrify any editing room: roughly 5 million feet of film, nearly 300 hours of footage. A massive archive shot without a fixed script or a clear structure. 4 different editors were brought in, working over many years to sift, test, assemble, and discard material. Scenes were filmed repeatedly, with only slight variations. Sequences that seemed crucial were cut entirely. Coppola constantly changed his mind, searching for new rhythms and tones. At times, he admitted he wasn't sure what the film was about, only that it had to feel right. As a result, Apocalypse Now wasn't born to tell a clean story, but to recreate a state of disorientation. And that post-production nightmare is etched into every beat the audience still feels today. 6. Helicopters called away to real battles. We tend to assume the helicopter scenes in Apocalypse Now were perfectly choreographed. Behind the camera, however, Logistics were pure chaos. The helicopters didn't belong to Hollywood. They were borrowed from the Philippine military with government approval. These were active military aircraft. It wasn't unusual for Coppola to be ready to shoot a major sequence when pilots suddenly received orders to fly off on real combat missions without warning, without negotiation. Cameras were ready. Extras were in position. Smoke and explosions were set. And then, an empty sky. Shooting schedules collapsed. Coppola was repeatedly left helpless, forced to cancel or radically alter scenes on the spot. The chaos meant no day of filming was ever stable. Every shoot was a gamble. Ironically, this instability created one of the film's greatest strengths, a genuine sense of war uncertainty, loss of control, and endless waiting with no guarantee of resolution. 5. Apocalypse Now, a mocking joke that became an icon. The title, Apocalypse Now, sounds grave, ominous, and prophetic. Yet its origin began as a sarcastic joke. In the late 1960s, America's counterculture spread slogans like Nirvana Now, calling for instant enlightenment, peace, and spiritual liberation. Screenwriter John Milius flipped that spirit on its head, turning it into Apocalypse Now. Not awakening, but annihilation. Not paradise, but the end of the world. A bitter irony suggesting that in the context of the Vietnam War, those beautiful slogans rang hollow. Interestingly, the title is never spoken in the film. It appears only briefly as graffiti at Kurtz's compound. Coppola chose the most discreet and grimy form possible, scrawled hastily on a wall like an abandoned slogan. And from a counterculture joke, Apocalypse Now became one of the most iconic titles in film history. 4. Clint Eastwood Willard was too dark to accept. Before Willard carried Martin Sheen's weary face and fractured gaze, the role had once been offered to a very different name, Clint Eastwood. At the time, Eastwood was already a top-tier Hollywood star, an emblem of the action hero controlled decisive standing tall amid chaos. That's precisely why his refusal had nothing to do with scheduling or money, but with a profound mismatch in spirit. Eastwood felt Apocalypse Now was too bleak, too dark, not just about war, but about the human psyche itself. Willard is not a hero. He doesn't drive the story with action or conviction. He drifts, passive collapsing inward. That refusal became an accidental turning point. It opened the door for Martin Sheen, and with him a fragile, haunted, breakable Willard. Not a symbol of hardened masculinity, but a man who could shatter at any moment. That choice made Apocalypse Now more unsettling and more honest. 3. Coppola on the edge suicide threats during production. Few realised that behind all those bold artistic decisions was a man slowly being worn down. Throughout the making of Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola bore every imaginable pressure. At once, years-long shooting storms, destroying sets, runaway budgets, a lead actor's heart attack, and countless irreversible decisions. In that context, Coppola repeatedly told collaborators that he thought about killing himself. These were not offhand remarks, but statements made at critical moments. He admitted to sleeping very little, living in a state of sustained tension. Each day felt like the film might collapse and that he would be responsible for dragging hundreds of people down with it. That psychological isolation left him feeling completely out of control. What's frightening is this Apocalypse Now doesn't merely depict the madness of war. It was made in genuine madness, with its director standing at the edge of psychological collapse. To Cannes, 1979, when the film was still unfinished. In 1979, Apocalypse Now was brought to the Cannes Film Festival in what could only be described as a reckless state. Francis Ford Coppola openly admitted the film wasn't truly finished. He was still wrestling with the ending, the overall rhythm, and the work's final meaning. The Cannes cut was rough, long, and unstable, exactly like the way the film had been made. Audience and critical reactions split violently. Some hailed it as an unprecedented masterpiece. Others dismissed it as a self-indulgent mess, too long, too obsessive, unable to control itself. Heated debates erupted across the festival grounds. In a now famous moment, Coppola declared, "This film is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam." Then the unexpected happened. Apocalypse Now was awarded the Palme d'Or shared with The Tin Drum. A shocking victory, not only because of the controversy, but because the film won while still unfinished. Cannes that year became part of the legend, a place where a film not yet settled, polished or complete was still recognised as a cinematic landmark. 1. The final legacy. When Apocalypse Now was finally released, many still questioned whether Coppola's gamble had been worth it. The box office answered quickly, over $150 million in worldwide revenue, a major success given its perilous production. The film earned 8 Academy Award nominations, winning 2 key Oscars for cinematography and sound elements that directly reflected its scale and intensity. Yet, Apocalypse Now's legacy doesn't lie in awards or revenue. It lies in how it redefined the war film. No heroic arc, no sense of victory, no moral reassurance. Instead, it drags viewers into a fevered state where war appears as a process that corrodes human beings from within. Over time, Apocalypse Now has been taught, analysed and debated as a major work of art, both an achievement and a warning. A film born from chaos, obsession and real danger. And for that reason, it endures as one of the greatest war films of all time, not because it offers answers, but because it refuses to let us look away easily. If you've made it this far, Apocalypse Now is probably no longer just a film from memory. It's a journey filled with unresolved questions. Now tell us in the comments which behind-the-scenes detail of Apocalypse Now haunted you the most. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to keep exploring the secrets behind cinema's golden age in future videos.